I normally wouldn't bring this up, but you mentioned earlier your husband.
Hmm.
And I bring him up because he has declared me his rival. Uh, and how did you two meet?
We met at Walmart, actually. I trained him. He was a temp, and I trained him how to count down his till. It was close to Christmas time, so brought on a bunch of temps, and I was his trainer.
He was a Walmart Christmas temp,
Yep.
and you trained him, and that was the beginning of this love story.
Yeah, yeah. I think our love story is actually cooler than Wendy and Gabe's, but you know, I don't know. I guess you could be the judge of that. Ours is almost as unbelievable, I think. I People are always like, "Oh, it's so cheesy and the love story is so unbelievable." I'm like, dude, the love story is the most believable part about the book. Just because that's my personal experience, it's very swift and um, he's always been ultra cheesy. So like, he's even more cheesy than Gabe. Like I had to reel in the cheese on Gabe because I knew it was just not going to go over well with readers. So I had to reel it in. But in real life, my husband is actually that cheesy. So
So I'm assuming, because like I said, as authors, we often base characters off of real people. Is Gabriel Brad?
um so he loves to say yes, but there are many things about Gabe that are not at all like Brad and much more like me. So Gabe is very analytical, and he does a lot. He loves to research. He loves to know about everything. Brad does, but to only to an extent that it serves him. Whereas Gabe's curious about everything. I'm kind of the same way. Um, but Gabe's like hangups, like so Gabe's flaws and imperfections. Those are very much like my husband. Um, just like maybe getting over like the idea of like you want your spouse to be happy and you think you know how they're going to be happy, and so you try to make that happiness instead of like letting them figure that out for themselves. Like that's very much the beginning of our marriage, and that was something that rolled with that he had to figure out how to do that. So yeah, I yes, to an extent. Often when I ask myself like what would Gabe do in this situation, and I really have no idea, I ask Brad. Honestly, because Gabe is such an out of the box thinker and I'm not really, and Brad absolutely is. So I'll ask him, what would you do in this situation? And I always get a really like ridiculous answer, but I mean it's out of the
It's
box.
real.
That's literally the definition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That is who he is. That's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. Now, paint me a picture here. So you get married. At what point did you write your book?
So 2009 is when I started writing. We got married in 2002. So 7 years after we got married.
Okay. Then what? You have this book, right? It exists now.
Yeah.
How do you go about promoting it? I imagine a lot of
Um,
authors out there have the same question, like, what was your journey with promotion?
so I wish it was a short story. I'll try to like sum it up a little bit. But after I wrote the first three books, I was like, I should really learn about writing. Now that I've written these three books, I hadn't published them yet. They were still manuscripts. And I went to get my creative writing degree. And one of my classes was about uh, research, like basically writing research papers. And I was like, oh, that's easy. I'm good at research papers. And the topic that I picked was um, how electronic media was affecting the publishing industry. So it was really kind of the advent of ebooks. They really had started to become like a thing. And so the landscape was changing pretty drastically. And as I did my research, I began to realize what literary agents and publishers were looking for. And I kind of liken it to football players. So if someone's getting drafted, like someone gets drafted based on believing that already that they're successful, like they're already, like if you look at Zion Williamson in Duke basketball, like he was already a thing when he got recruited. It was like a no-brainer. And so they're kind of looking for a no-brainer, someone who already has a following, somebody who already is a thing, or they're an expert in their field or whatever. Very rarely are they looking for raw talent, raw undiscovered talent. That's kind of very much like a lottery sort of thing. Like the chances of that are very, very small. And even if you pick up a publisher, you're almost 100% responsible for your own marketing, even in that case. You don't really get thrown this giant budget to market your book.
Well, certainly not as a first-time author.
Yeah, certainly not. And so I just really was like disillusioned with the whole process. And so I just decided not even go that route. And really didn't put much into the books until my husband was like, you should really like publish this just to have it published, to say, you never know. So I did with books 1, then book 2, and then he didn't really read it, I think, until the second book had come out. And he was like, oh, this is really good. And then he read the second one. He was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. I'm going to help you make this a big thing. So as you probably know, most authors are not very good marketers. We are not, this just doesn't, marketing and creativity just don't really, it just, yeah.
There are times where they are almost conflicting skills. The way I say is, authors are not out promoting at the party. They're at home writing, right? We're not the extroverts. And so, it's a lot easier for us to be at home writing.
Well, because you have to have this level of honesty with yourself. And you almost have to put on a different personality in order to market. It's not that you have to lie about your book, but you almost kind of do. Like you almost have to, you have to make it, you have to market, you have to convince people. And you're not just selling your book most of the time. Most of the time you're selling yourself. And like, that's just that's against the grain. If you're an artistic type, what you're doing with your art is you're putting yourself out there in your art, because this part of you isn't easily portrayed to other people. So, when he decided to jump on board and help me market the book, I thought, well, there's really no better person out there to actually market, because there's nobody more promotional, more driven, doesn't give up than my husband. So, he started off doing some marketing, but eventually was like, we got to take this to the people who want to read about superheroes. We got to go to Comic-Cons. So we went to Salt Lake Comic-Con, was our first one. And I think we brought like, we bought like 1,000 copies, I want to say. It was something astronomical.
I remember it being quite ambitious.
Yes, my husband was like, well, there's this many people there, and if we can sell to this percentage, this is how many books we need to sell. And I'm like, whatever. I write books. And I think we like totally bombed. We must have sold like 50 copies or something. I don't even remember. But we went home dejected with our tail between our legs, but not to be daunted. My husband was like, okay, we just have to reinvent the wheel. So we decided to embark on an RV tour, and we bought like a really old RV because that's what we could afford. We raised like $20,000 through Kickstarter to buy that RV. We sold all of the furniture in our house to be able to pay for a bunch of comic book conventions at that time. And put all 4 of our kids ages 3 and up, 3 to like 12, and put them in an RV and traveled America.
So
selling my book.
Let me sum up here. You had a convention experience.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, by your own standards, failed.
Mm-hmm.
And from that experience, you said, what we really need is to double down on this with fury and fervor.
Well, you have to understand, we had just dropped like thousands of dollars on books, okay? Like, okay, not to get too lost in the weeds, but before I made that purchase of all of, I mean, it was huge. I'm trying to think, it was like $5,000 or something. I had, before I pressed like buy on that, I had this experience where I was just like my heart was beating, and I was like, I don't know, we should do this as like the rest of our savings, right? Our cash savings, all right, the rest of what we have. And I just had this experience where I had looked up to the sky because my son was in flag football, and so I was at practice, and I had looked up, and immediately the verse came to mind that the one about God taking care of the sparrow. Does he not also take care of the sparrows? And that's kind of how inspiration and assurance, spiritual reassurance, has always come to me. Like, things that I've read will come to mind at the exact time that I'm thinking, just out of the blue, like song lyrics and things like that. So I just knew that it was going to be okay. I was like, I can do this. And so press buy. And even though like we had failed at that, it was kind of like, okay, yes, we failed. And obviously this is going to be a lot harder than we imagined. But we kind of are already in it. And how can we do it better? So up until that point, we had thought going to conventions from our home base, right? Every month or so. Well, if we're going to actually make money at this, we have to do them more often. And we also knew that our house that we had in North Dakota could be rented for quite a bit of money. And so any extra that we didn't have to live off of from actually selling books, we could earn from our house as a rental. And so we kind of had some things that made it make sense at the time, and we could actually financially do it without being like, oh, we gotta have a backup plan. We did have a plan going into it. And then, it wasn't a small thing to do that. I mean, I say, oh, we just decided to do this thing, but in reality, like we fasted. We're religious people, so we fasted and we prayed. And should we go out on the road in an RV or in a camper, which we hadn't decided which one we were going to do at that point. And like literally the next day after we had really put in some fasting and prayer time, there was a van and a camper parked in front of our house. And there was one of those magnetic signs on the van that said Jesus. I have a picture of it, by the way. And just to be clear, like, our kids knew that this was something that we were thinking about doing. And as soon as they walked home from school and they saw it, they said, oh my gosh, we're going on the road. Like, they already knew. The answer was so obvious that they were like, okay, clearly. And I remember when I said my parents, like, you're gonna have to make this super clear, because I'm not just gonna like go do this, because I'm not really a spontaneous person. So you're gonna have to like make it really clear. And that's what happened. So
no gentle nudges. I need the 2x4.
Yeah. Like, some things you really need a pretty clear sign. Other things, it's like, I can kind of head that direction and be okay. But this was like, we were gonna do it. It's gonna require like major changes and major action taken to be able to make it work.